I'm so happy I finally do it today. It's pretty late. It's 8 8:25, but I still want to do it. I really love this novel, and good things happening. So let's begin. And you see, this interesting. Mm, I like my face here. Um, I tried the first time. I can't get the the video work. So I tried again and again and again. My eyes already mm, closing and maybe sleepy, but I still want my face here. That's interesting thing. Yeah. Anyway, let's begin. She thought she had never, she, she thought she, oh my God, she thought she had never seen more surprise and delight than the dark face expressed when she spoke in the familiar tongue. The truth was the poor fellow felt as if his gods had intervened, and the candid voice came from heaven itself. At once Sarah saw that he had been accustomed to European children. He put forward a flood of respectful thanks. He was the servant of Mrs. Saber. The monkey was a good monkey and would not bite, but unfortunately he was difficult to catch. He would flee from one spot to another, like the lightning. He was disobedient, though not evil. Ramdas knew him as if he were his child, and Ramdas he would sometimes obey, but not always. If Miss Heap would permit Ramdas, he himself could cross the roof to the room, enter the windows, and regain the unworthy little animal. But he was evidently afraid Sarah might think he was taking great liberty and perhaps would not let him come. Leave at once. Give him leave. Give him leave at once. Can you get across? She inquired. In a moment, he answered her. Then come, she said. He is flying from side to side of the room as if he was frightened. Ramdas slipped through his attic window and crossed to her as steadily and lightly as if he had walked on roofs all his life. He slipped he slipped through the skylight and dropped upon his feet without a sound. Then he turned to Sarah and salaamed again. The monkey saw him and uttered a little scream. Ramdas hastily precaution took the precaution of shutting the skylight, and then went in chase of him. It was not a very long chase. The monkey prolonged it a few minutes, evidently for the mere fun of it, but presently he spun chatting on Ramdas' shoulder, and sits there chatting and clinging to his neck with a weird little skinny arm. Ramdas thanked Sarah profoundly. He had seen that his quick native eyes had taking in at a glance all the bare shabbiness of the room, but he spoke to her as if he was speaking to the little daughter of a Radha, and pretended that he did not presume he did not presume to remain more than a few moments after he had got the monkey, and those were the deep and grateful in return for her indulgence. Um, ob- obeisance, 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 o, obeisance, obeisance. Grateful obeisance to her. 行礼 obeisance to her, and those moments were given to further deep and grateful obeisance to her in return for her indulgence. This little evil one, he said, stroking the monkey, was in truth not so evil as he seemed, and his master, who was ill, was sometimes amused by him. He would have been made sad if his favourite had run away and been lost. Then he salaamed got through the skylight and crossed the slates again with as much agility as the monkey himself has displayed. Agility 敏捷哦 correct agility much agility 敏捷 as monkey himself and displayed. When he had gone, Sarah stood in the middle of her attic and thought of many things his face and his manner had brought back to her. The sight of his native custom and the profound reverence of his manner, profound rever, reverence, profound reverence. I guess profound reverence, 尊敬。A profound reverence of his manner stirred all her past memories. It seemed a strange thing to remember that she, the the George, the George, the George, the Georgia, the George, the drudge. Oh, it's really drudge.
Drudge.
Drudge. The drudge. Remember that she, the drudge whom the cook had said insulting things to an hour ago, said insulting things to an hour ago, had only a few years ago been surrounded by people who all treated her as Ramdas had treated her, who salaamed when she went by, whose, whose forehead almost touched the ground when he spoke to them, who were her servants and her slaves. It was like a sort of dream. It was all over, and it could never come back. It certainly seemed that there was no way in which any change could take place. She knew that Miss Minchin intended that her future should be, so long as she was too young to be used as a regular teacher, she would be used as an errand girl and servant, and yet expected to remember what she knew that Miss Minton intended that her future should be, so long as she was too young to be used as a regular teacher. She would be used as an errand girl and servant, and yet expected to remember what she had learned, and in some mysterious way to learn. The greater number of her evenings she was supposed to spend at study, and at various indefinite at various indefinite intervals she was examined and knew he would have been severely ad- admonished 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 if he had not advanced as was expected of her. Admonish, admonish, 劝诫，责备。admonish admonish 责备。She would have been severely admonished. Admonished, severely admonished if she had not advanced as what expected of her. The truth, indeed, was that Miss Minchin knew that she was too anxious to learn to require teacher. To learn to require teacher. Give her books and she would devour them and end by knowing them by heart. She might be trusted to be equal to teaching a good deal in the course of a few years. In the course of a few years, this was what would happen. When she was older, she would be expected to drudge to drudge in schoolroom as she drudged now in various parts of the house. They would be obliged to give her more respectable clothes, but they would be sure to be plain and ugly and to make her look somehow like a servant. That was all that seemed to be looked forward to, and Sarah stood quite still for several minutes and thought it over. Then a thought came back to her which made the color rise in her cheek, and a spark light itself in her eyes. She, she straightened her thin little body and lifted her head. "Whatever comes," she said, "can't alert one thing. If I am a princess in rags and I can be a princess inside. It would be easy to be a princess if I were dressed, but it is a great deal more of triumph to be one all the time when no one knows it. There was Maria when she was in prison, and her throne was gone, and she had only a black gown on, and her hair was white, and they insulted her and called her widow-capped. still more like a queen than when she was so gay and everything was so grand. I like her best then. Those howling mobs of people did not frighten her. She was stronger than they were, even when they cut her head off. This was not a new thought, but quite an old one. By this time, it had consoled her. It had consoled her through many a bitter day, and she had gone about the house with an expression in her face which Miss Minchin could not understand, was a source of great annoyance to her, as it seemed as if the child were mentally living a life which held her above the rest of the world. It was as if she scarcely heard the rude and acid thing said to her, or, if she heard them, did not care for them at all. Sometimes, when she was in the midst of some harsh, domineering speech, Miss Minchin would find the still and childish eye fixed upon her with something like a proud smile in them. At such times, she did not know that Sarah was saying to herself, "You don't know that you are saying these things to a princess, and that if I chose, I could wave my hand and order you to execution. I only spare you because I am a princess, and you are a poor, stupid, uncanned, vulgar old thing." Vulgar, vulgar, vulgar,
vulgar,
vulgar, 粗俗的。Vulgar old thing, and don't know any better. This used to interest and amuse her more than anything else. And queer and fanciful, and queer and fanciful, she found comfort in it, and it was a good thing for her. While the thought of her, she could not be made rude and malicious by the rudeness and malice of those malicious malice. Malicious by the rudeness and malice of those about her. A princess must be polite, she said to herself. And so, when the servants, taking their tone from their mistress, were insolent, and ordered her about, she would hold her head erect and reply to them with a quiet civility which often made them stare at her. "She's got more airs and graces than if she come from Buckingham Palace, that young one," said the cook, chuckling a little sometimes. "I lose my temper with her often enough, but I will say, she never forgets her manner. If you please, cook, will you be so kind, cook? I beg your pardon, cook. May I trouble you, cook?" She dropped them about the kitchen as if there was nothing The morning after the interview with Ramdas and his monkey, Sarah was in the schoolroom with her small pupil. Having finished giving them their lessons, she was putting the French exercise book together and thinking as she did of the various things Roy personage in this disguise were called upon to. Sarah was in the schoolroom with her small pupils, having finished giving them their lessons. She was putting the French access book together and thinking, as did, she did, she did of it, of the various things Roy personage this in disguise were called upon to. Disguise. Roy personage in disguise. Disguise. 伪装 disguise 伪装 Royal personage in disguise were called upon to do. Afraid the instance, burning the cakes and getting his ear boxed by the wife of the neatherd. How frightened she must have been when she found out what she had done. If Miss Minchin should find out that she, Sarah, whose toes were almost sticking out of her boots, was a princess, a real one. The look in her eyes was exactly the look which Miss Minchin most disliked. She would not have it. She was quite near her, and was so enraged that she actually flew at her and boxed her ear, exactly as the neatherd wife boxed King Everett's. It made Sarah start. She wakened from her dream at the shock, and catching her breath, stood still a second. Then, not knowing he was going to do it, she broke into a little laugh. What are you laughing at, you bold, impudent child? Sarah, whose toe was almost sticking out of her boots, was a princess, a real one. The look in her eyes was exactly the look which Miss Minchin most disliked. She would not have it. She was quite near her, and was so enraged that she actually flew at her and boxed her ear, exactly as the neatherd's wife had boxed King Everett's. It made Sarah start. She awakened from her dream at the shock, and catching her breath, stood still a second. Then, not knowing she was going to do it, she broke into a little laugh. What are you laughing at, you bold, impudent child? It took Sarah a few seconds. It took Sarah a few seconds to control herself sufficiently to remember that she was a princess. Her cheeks were red and smarting from the blow she had received. I was thinking, she answered. Beg my pardon immediately, sighed the said Miss Minchin. Sarah hesitated a second before she replied, I will beg your pardon for your laugh. If I will beg your pardon for laughing if it was rude, she said then, but I won't beg your pardon for thinking. What were you thinking? Demanded Miss Minchin. How dare you think? What were you thinking? Jess tittered, and she and Lavinia nudged each other in unison. All the girls looked up from their books to listen. Really, it always interests them little when Miss Minchin attacked Sarah. Sarah always said something queer and never seemed the least bit frightened. She was not in the least frightened now, though her boxed ear were scarlet and her eyes were as bright as stars. I was thinking, she answered grandly and politely, that you did not know what you were doing. That I did not know what I was doing, Miss Minchin fairly gasped. Yes, said Sarah, and I was thinking what would happen if I were a princess and you boxed my ear, what I should do to you. And I was thinking that if I were one, you would never dare to do it, whatever I said or did. And I was thinking how surprised and frightened you would be found out. She had the imagined future so clearly before her eyes that she spoke in a manner which had an effect, effect even upon Miss Minchin. It almost seemed narrow and imaginative meant that there must be some real power hidden behind this candid daring. Candid daring. Candid. Really interesting. Candid. Candid daring. What? She exclaimed. Found out what? That I really was a princess, said Sarah. Anything I liked. Every pair of eyes in the room widened to its full limit. Lavinia leaned forward on her seat to look. Go to your room, cried Miss Minchin ruthlessly. This ins- instant, this instant. Leave the schoolroom. Attend to your lessons, young ladies. Sarah made a little bow. Excuse me for laughing if it was impolite, she said, room, leaving Miss Minchin struggling with her rage and the girls whispering over their books. Did you see her? Did you see how queer she looked? Jess broke out. I should all surprised if she did turn out to be something. Suppose she should. The other side of the wall, a row of horses. It is interesting to think of things which are being done and said on the other side of the wall of the very rooms one is living in. Sarah was fond of amusing herself by trying to imagine the things hidden by the wall which divided the uh, select seminary from the Indian gentleman's house. She knew that the schoolroom was next to the Indian gentleman's study, and she hoped that the wall was thick so that the noise made sometimes after lesson hours would not disturb him. I was growing quite fond of him, she said to Ermengarde. I should not like him to be disturbed. I have adopted him for a friend. You can do that with people you never speak to at all. You can just watch them and think about them and be sorry for them until they seem almost like relations. I am quite anxious sometimes when I see the doctor call twice a day. I have very few relations, said Ermengarde reflectively, and I am very glad of it. I don't like those I have. My two aunts are always saying, Dear me, Ermengarde, you are very fat. You shouldn't eat sweets. And my uncle is always asking me thinking things. When did Edward the Third ascend the throne? And who died of a surfeit of a lampreys? Sarah laughed. People you never speak to can can't ask you questions like this, like that, she said, and I'm sure the Indian gentleman wouldn't even if he was quite intimate, intimate with you. And I am fond of him. She had become fond of the large family because they looked happy, but he had become fond of the Indian gentleman because he looked unhappy. He had evidently not fully recovered from some very severe illness. In the kitchen, where, of course, the servants, through some mysterious means, there was much discussion of his case. He was not an Indian gentleman really, but an Englishman who had lived in India. He had met with great misfortune, which had for a time so im- impro- improved his whole fortune that he had thought himself ruined and disgraced forever. The shock had been so great that he had almost died of brain fever, and 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 ever since he had been shattered in health, though his fortune had changed and all his possessions had been restored to him. His trouble and peril had been connected with mines, and the mines with diamonds in them, said the cook. No savings of mine never goes into no mine, particular diamond ones. With a side glance at Sarah, we all know something of them. He felt as my papa felt. He felt as my papa felt, Sarah thought. He was ill as my papa was, but he did not die. So her heart was more drawn to him than before. When she was sent out at night, she used sometimes to feel quite glad, because there was always a chance that the curtain of the horse next door might not yet be closed, and she could look into the warm room and see her adopted friend. When no one was about, she used sometimes to stop and holding to the I, iron railings. Here was her fancy. Perhaps candle thoughts reach people somehow. Even perhaps you can feel if you can't hear, was her fancy. Perhaps Perhaps kind thoughts reach people somehow, even through windows and doors and walls. Perhaps you feel a little warm get well and happy again. I'm so sorry for you, she would whisper in an intense little voice. I wish you had a little Monsieur who Miss who could pet you as I used to pet my papa when he had a headache. I should like to be your little Monsieur myself, poor dear. Good night. Good night. God bless you. She would go away, feeling quite comforted and a little warmer herself. Her sympathy was so strong that it seemed as if it must reach him somehow, as he sat alone in his armchair by the fire, nearly always in a great dressing gown, and nearly always with his forehead resting in his hand as he gazed hopelessly into the fire. He looked to Sarah like a man who had a trouble on his mind still, not merely he looked to Sarah like a man who had a trouble on his mind still, not merely like one whose troubles lay all in the past. He always seems as if was think he were thinking of something that hurt him now. She said to herself, but he has got his money back, and he will get over his brain fever in time, so he ought not to look like that. I wonder if there is something else. If there was something else, something even servants didn't hear of, she could not help believing that the father of the large family knew it. The gentleman she called Miss Montmorency. Miss Montmorency went to see him often, and Mrs. Montmorency and all the little Montmorency went too, though that's often. They seemed they he seemed particularly fond of the two elder little girls, the Janet and Nora, who had been so alarmed their small brother Donald had given Sarah his sixpence. He had in fact a very tender place in his heart for all children, and particularly for little girls. Janet and Nora were as fond of him as he was of them, and looked forward with the greatest pleasure to the afternoon when they were allowed to cross the square and make their well-behaved little visits to him. Extremely decorous little visit because he was an invalid. He had in fact a very tender place. He had in fact a very tender place in his heart for all children, and particularly for little girls. Janet and Nora were as fond of him as he was of them, and looked forward with the greatest pleasure to be the afternoons when they were allowed to cross the square and make their well-behaved little visit to him. They were extremely decorous little visits because he was an invalid. Little decorous, decorous，端庄得体的。They were extremely 端庄得体的。 decorous little visit because he was an invalid. Invalid 有病的哦，invalid 除了无效的，还可以说有病的。He is a poor thing, said Janet, and she says we cheer him up. We try to cheer him up very quietly. Janet was the head of the family and kept the rest of it in order. It was she who decided when it was discreet to ask the Indian gentleman to tell the story about India. It was she who decided when it is discreet 不得体的、谨慎的、慎重的 discreet。
discreet,
discreet， 小心的、谨慎的。To ask the Indian gentleman to tell stories about India, and it was she who saw when he was tired, and it was time to steal quietly away and tell Ramdas to go to him. They were very fond of Ramdas. He could have told any member of story if he had been able to speak anything but Hindustan. The Indian gentleman's real name was Mr. Carrisford, and Janet told Mr. Carrisford about the encounter with the little girl who was not a beggar. He was very much interested, and all the more so when he heard from Ramdas of the adventure of the monkey on the roof. Ramdas made for him a very clear picture of the attic and its desolate and its desolateness of the bare floor and the broken plaster, the rusty empty grate and the hard narrow bed. Camacho, he said to the father of the he said, after he had heard this description. I wonder how many of the attics in this square are like that one, and how many wretched little servant girls sleep on such bed. While I tossed on my down pillow, loaded and harassed by wealth that is most of it not mine. Wretch.信，我记得就是这样的呀。不信仰。Wretch. How many wretched little servant girls sleep on such beds? Well, I toss on my own pillows, loaded and harassed by wealth that is most not mine. My dear fellow, Miss Chemical answered cheerily, the sooner you cease tormenting, the better it will be for you. If you possessed all the wealth of, of all the Indies, you could not set right all the discomfort in the world. Began to refurnish all the attics in this square. There would still remain all the attics in all the other squares and streets to put in order. You are. If you possessed all the wealth of all the Indies, you could not set right all the discomfort in the world. And if you began to refurnish all the attics in this square, there would still remain all the attics in all the other squares and the streets to put in order. And there you are. Miss Carrisford said and bit her nose as he looked into the glowing bed of coals in the grate. Do you suppose, he said slowly after a pause, do you think it is possible that the other child, the child I never cease thinking of, I believe could possibly be reduced to any such condition as the poor little soul next door? Mr. I looked at him uneasily. He knew that the worst thing the man could do for himself, for his reason and his health, was to begin to think in the particular way of the particular subject. If the child at Madame Passeau's school in Paris was the one you are in search of, he answered soothingly, she would seem to be in the hands of people who can afford to take care of her. They adopt her because she had been the favorite companion of their little daughter who died. They had no, and Madame Passeau said that they were extremely well-to-do Russian. If the child at Madame Passeau's school in Paris was the one you are in search of, he answered soothingly, she would seem to be in the hands of people who can afford to take care of her. They adopt her because she had been the favorite companion of their little daughter who died. They had no other children, and Madame Passeau said that they were extremely well-to-do Russia. And the wretched woman actually did not know where they had taken her, exclaimed, and the wretched woman actually did not know where they had taken her, exclaimed Mr. Crisford. Miss Chemical shrugged his shoulders. She was a shrewd, worldly French woman, and was evidently only too glad to get the child so comfortably off her hand when the father's death left her totally unprovided for. Women of her type do not trouble themselves about the future of children who might prove a burden. The dead parents apparently disappeared and left no trace. If the child was the one I am in search of, you see, if we are not sure, there was a difference in the name. Madame Passeau pronounced it as if it were Carew instead. But that might be merely a matter of pronunciation. The circumstances were curiously similar. An English officer in India had placed his motherless little girl at the school. He had died suddenly after losing his fortune. Miss Miss Chemical paused a moment, as if a new thought had occurred to him. Are you sure the child was left at a school in Paris? Are you sure it was Paris? My dear fellow, broke forth Carrisford, with reckless badness. I am sure of nothing. I never saw either a child nor her mother. Ralph Carew and I loved each other as boys, but we had not met since our school days, until we met in India. I was absorbed in the magnificent promise of mines. He became absorbed too. The whole thing was so huge and glittering that we half lost our head. When we met, we scarcely spoke of anything else. I only knew that the child had been sent to school somewhere. I don't even remember now how I knew it. He was beginning to be excited. He always become he always become excited. He always became excited when his still weakened brain was by memory of the catastrophe of the past. Cat, catastrophe, catastrophes. Catastrophe. Catastrophe. 灾难 cat catastrophe is catastrophes of the past. Mr. Chemical watched him anxiously. It was necessary to ask some questions, but they must be put quietly and with caution. But you had reason to think the school was in Paris. But you had reason to think the school was in Paris. Yes, her mother was a Frenchwoman, and I had heard that she wished her child to be educated in Paris. It seemed only likely that she would be there. Yes, Mr. Kamiko said. It seems more than probable. The Indian gentleman leaned forward and struck the table with his hand. Kamiko, he said, I must find her. If she is alive, she is somewhere. If she is friendless and penniless, it is through my fault. How is a man to get back his nerve with a thing like that on his mind? This sudden change, this sudden change of luck at mine has made uh, really realities of all our most fantastic dreams, and poor Crew's child may be begging in the street. No, no, said Chemical. Try to be calm. Console yourself with the fact that when she is found, you have a fortune to hand over to her. Why was I not man enough to stand my ground when things looked bad or looked black? Carrisford groaned in petulant misery. Petulant, petulant. Hmm.
petulant,
Petulant, renewed. Misery. I believe I should have stood my ground if I had not been responsible for other people's money as well as my own. Poor Crewe had put into the scheme every penny that he owned. He trust, he trusted me, he loved me, and he died thinking I had ruined him. Tom Crisford, who played cricket, who played cricket at Eton with him, was a villain. He must have thought me. Don't reproach yourself so bitterly. I don't reproach myself because the speculation threatened to fail. I reproach myself for losing my courage. I ran away like a swindler and a thief because I could not face my best friends and tell him and his child. The of the large family put his hand on his shoulder comfortingly. You ran away because your brain had given way under the strain of mental torture, he said. You were half delirious already. Delirious. Delirious.
delirious,
You are half delirious already. You were half delirious already. If you had not been you would have if you have if you had not been you would have stayed and fought it out. You were in a hospital, stripped down in bed, raving with brain fever 2 days after you left the place. Remember that. Carrisford dropped his forehead in his hand. Good God, yes, he said. I was driven mad with dread and horror. I had not slept for weeks. The night I staggered out of my house, all the air seemed full of hideous things, mocking and mouthing at me. This is explanation enough in itself, said Miss Chemical. How could a man on the verge of brain fever judge Sinley? Carrisford shook his drooping head. And when I returned, Carew was dead and buried, and I seemed to remember nothing. I did not remember the children and the man's. Even when I began to recall her existence, everything seemed in a sort of haze. He stopped a moment and rubbed his forehead. It sometimes seems so now when I try to remember. Surely I must sometime have heard Crewe speak of the school she was sent to. Don't you think so? Not have spoken of it definitely. You never seem You never seem even to have heard her real name. She used to call her by an old pet name he had invented. He called her his little Misia, but the the wretched mind the wretched minds drove everything else out of our heads. We talked of nothing else. If he spoke of the school, I forgot, and now I shall never remember. Come, come, said Kamiko. We shall find her yet. We shall find her yet. We will continue to search for Madame Paco's good-natured Russians. She seemed to have a vague idea that they lived in Moscow. I will take that as a clue. If I were able to travel, I would go with you, sighed Carrisford. Sit here, wrapped in furs, and stare at the fire. And when I look into it, I seem to see Cruz's gay young face gazing back at me. He looked he looks as if he were asking me a question. Sometimes I dream of him at night, and he always stands before me and asks the same question in words. Can you guess what he says? Chemical, chemical. Miss Chemical answered him in a rather low voice. Not exactly, he said. He always said, Tom, old man, Tom, where is the little Misia? He caught at Chemical's hand and clung to it. I must be able to answer him. I must, he said. Help me to find her. Help me. On the other side of the wall, Sarah was sitting in her garret talking to uh, Melchizedek, who had come out for his evening meal. It has been hard to be a princess today, Melchizedek, Melchizedek, she said. It has been harder than usual. It gets harder, weather grows colder, and the streets get more sloppy. When Lavinia laughed at my muddy skirt as I passed her in the hall, I thought of something to say all in a flash, and I only just stopped myself in time. You can't sneer back at people like that if you are a princess, but you have to bite your tongue to hold yourself in. I bit mine. It was a cold afternoon, Melchizedek, and it's a cold night. Suddenly, she put her black head down in her arms, as she often did when she was alone. Oh, Papa, she whispered, what a long time it seemed since I was your little Misia. This was what happened that day on both sides of the wall. One of the populace. The winter was a wretched one. The winter was a wretched one. There were days on which Sarah tramped through snow when he went on her errand. There were worse days when the snow melted and combined itself with mud to form slush. There were others when the fog was so thick that the lamps in the street were lighted all day, and London looked as it has looked the afternoon several years ago, When the cab had driven through the with Sarah stuck up on its seats, leans against her father's shoulder. On such days, the windows of the house of the large family always looked delightful, cozy, and alluring, and the study in which the Indian gentleman sat glowed with warmth and rich color. But the attic was dismal beyond words. There were no longer sunset or sunrise to look at. Stars, it seemed to Sarah. The clouds hung low over the skylight, and were either gray or mud color, or dropping heavy rain. And at 4, even when there was no special fog, the daylight was at an end. If it was necessary to go to her attic for anything, Sarah was obliged to light a candle. The women in the kitchen were depressed, and that made them more ill-tempered than ever. Becky was driven like a little slave. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, even when there was no special fog, the daylight was at an end. If it was necessary to go to her attic for anything, Sarah was obliged to light a candle. The women in the kitchen were depressed, and that made them more ill-tempered than ever. Becky was driven like a little slave. "For you, miss," she said hoarsely to Sarah one night when she had crept into the attic. "For you, the and the Bastille and being the prisoner in the next cell. I should die. That would that there does seem real now, doesn't it? The miss is more like the head jailer every day she leaves. I can just see them big keys, you see, she carries. The cook, she's like one of the under jailer. Tell me some more, please, miss. Tell me about the uh, passage we've dig under the walls." "I'll tell you something warmer," shivered Sarah. "Get your coat and wipe it round you, and I'll get mine, and we'll huddle close together on the bed, and I will tell you about the trop- tropical forest where the Indian gentleman's monkey. When I see him sitting on the table near the window and looking out into the street with that mourn- mournful expression, I always feel sure he's thinking about the tropic forest where he used to swing by his tail from coconut trees. I wonder who caught him and if he left a family behind who had depend on him for coconuts. Depend on him for coconuts. There is a warmer, miss. "That's warmer, miss," said Becky, gratefully, "but someway even the Bastille is sort of heating when you got telling about it." "That is because it makes you think of something else," said Sarah, wiping the coverlet round her until only her small dark face was to be seen looking out of it. "I've noticed this. What you have to do with your mind when your body is miserable to make it think of something else. Can you do it, miss?" faltered faltered Becky. regarding her with admiring eyes. Sarah knit her bow a moment. Sometimes I can and sometimes I can't, she said stoutly. But when I can't, I'm all right. And what I always could if we practiced enough. I've been practicing a good deal lately, and it's beginning to be easier than it used to be. When things are horrible, just horrible, I think I can of being a princess. I say to myself, I am a princess, and I am a fairy one, and because I am very nothing, I am a fairy, nothing can hurt me or make me uncomfortable. You don't know how it makes you forget with a laugh. He, she had many opportunities of making her mind thinking of something else, and many opportunities of proving to herself whether or not she was a princess. But one of the strongest tests she was ever put to came on a certain dreadful day, which she often thought afterwards would never quite fade out her memory, even in the years to come. For several days it had rained continuously. The streets were chilly and sloppy and full of dreary cold mist. Mud everywhere, sticky linden mud, and over everything the pile of drizzle, drizzle and fog. Of course, there were several long and tiresome errands to be done. There always were one day like this, and Sarah was sent out again and again, until her shabby clothes were damp through. The absurd old feathers on her forlorn hat were more draggled and absurd than ever, and her drawn, trodden, down, downtrodden shoes were so wide that they could not hold any more water. Added to this, she had been deprived of her dinner. She had been deprived of her dinner because Miss Minchin had chosen to punish her. She was so cold and hungry and tired that her face began to have a pinched look, and now and then some kind-hearted person passing her in the street glancing at her with sudden sympathy. But she did not know that. She hurried on, trying to make her mind think of something else. It was really very necessary. Her way of doing of her way of doing it was to pretend and suppose, with all the strength in her. But really this time it was harder than she had ever found it, and once or twice she thought it almost made her more cold and hungry instead of what she perse- preserved, but she persevered obs- obstinately, obstinately, but she persevered obstinately, and as the muddy water squeezed through her broken shoes, the wind seemed trying to drag her thin jacket from her. She talked to herself as she walked, though she did not speak aloud or even move her lip. Ob- obstinately, obstinately. obstinate,
obstinately,
顽固的、固执的。我猜是这个，顽固的、固执的、顽固的。But she preserved, preserved, no, preserve, persevere, persevere,
persevere,
坚持，坚韧，那么韧，熬住，坚韧，坚韧，坚韧。persevered obstinately, and as the muddy water screeched through her broken shoes and the wind seemed trying to drag her thin jacket from her, she talked to herself as she walked, though she did not speak aloud or even move her lips. Suppose I had dry clothes on, she thought. Suppose I had good shoes and a long thick coat and merino stockings and a whole umbrella, and suppose just when I was near a baker's where they sold hot bun, I should find sixpence which belonged to nobody. Suppose if I did, I should go into the shop and buy 6 of the hottest buns and eat them all without stopping. Some very odd thing happened in this world sometimes. It certainly was an odd thing that happened to Sarah. She had to cross the street just when she was saying this to herself. The mud was dreadful. She had to wade. She picked her way as carefully as she could, but she couldn't her way. She had to look down at her feet and the mud, and in looking down, just as she reached the pavement, she saw something shining in the gutter. It was actually a piece of silver, a tiny piece trodden it, but still with spirits enough left to shine a little. Not quite a sixpence, but the next thing to it, a four-penny piece. In 1 second, it was in her cold little red and blue hand. Oh, she gasped. It is true, it is true. And then, if you will believe me, she looked straight at the shop directly facing her, and it was a baker's shop, and a cheerful, stout, motherly woman with rosy cheek was putting into the window a tray of delicious newly baked hot bun, fresh from the oven, large, plump, shiny buns with currant in them. It almost made Sarah feel faint for a few seconds. The shock, the sight of the buns, and the delightful odor of warm bread floating, odors of warm bread floating floating up through the baker's ceiling window. She knew she need not hesitate to use the little piece of money. It had evidently been laying in the mud for some time, and its owner was completely lost in the stream of the passing people, who crowded and jostled each other all day long. But I'll go and ask the baker woman if she had lost anything, she said to herself rather faintly. So she crossed the pavement and put her white feet on the step. As she did so, she saw something that made her stop. It was a little figure, more forlorn even than herself, a little figure which was not much more than a bundle of rag, from which small bare red muddy feet peeped out, only because the rag with which their owner was trying to cover them were not long enough. Above the rugs appeared a shock head of tangled hair, a dirty face with big, hollow, hungry eyes. Sarah knew they were hungry eyes the moment she saw them, and she felt a sudden sympathy. This, she said to herself with a little sigh, is one of the populace, and she is hungrier than I am. The child is one of the populace, stared up at Sarah, and shuffled herself aside a little, so as to give her room to pass. She was used to being made to give room to everybody. She knew that if a policeman chanced to see her, he would tell her to move on. Sarah clutched her little fourpenny piece and hesitated for a few seconds. Then she spoke to her. Are you hungry? She asked. The child shuffled herself and her rag a little more. Aren't I just? He said in hoarse voice. Just aren't I? Haven't you had any dinner? Said Sarah. No dinner, more hoarsely still, and with more suffering. Not yet breakfast, not yet no supper, no nothing. Since when? asked Sarah. Don't know. Never get nothing today. Nowhere. I've asked and asked. Just to just to look at her made Sarah more hungry and faint. But those queer little thoughts were at work in her brain, and she was talking to herself, though she was sick at heart. If I am a princess, she was saying, if I'm a princess, when they were pulled and driven from their throne, they always share with the populace if they met one poor and hungrier than themselves. They always shared. Buns are penny each. If it had been sixpence, I could have eaten six. It won't be enough for either of us, but it will be better than nothing. Wait a minute, she said to the beggar child. She went into the shop. It was warm and smelled delicious. The woman was just going to put some more hot bun into the window. If you please, said Sarah, have you lost fourpence, a silver fourpence? And she held the forlorn little piece of money out to her. The woman looked at it and then at her intense little face, and draggled one's fine clothes. Bless us! No, she answered. Did you find it? Yes, said Sarah, in the gutter. Keep it then, said the woman. It may have been there for a week, and goodness knows who lost it. You could never find out. I know that, said Sarah, but I thought I would ask you. Not many would, said the woman, looking puzzled and interested and good-natured all at once. Do you want to buy something? She added, as she saw Sarah glance at the buns. 4 pounds, if you please, said Sarah. Those at the penny each. The woman went to the window and put some in a paper bag. Sarah noticed that she put in 6. I said 4, if you please, she explained. I have only 4 pence. I will throw in 2 for make weight, said the woman with the good-natured look. I dare say you can eat them sometimes. Aren't you hungry? Hungry? A mist rose before Sarah's eyes. Yes, she answered. I am very hungry, and I am much obliged to you for your kindness. And she was going to add, there is a child outside who is hungrier than I am. But just at that moment, 2 or 3 customs came in at once, and each one seemed in a hurry, so she could only thank the woman again and go out. The beggar girl was still handled up in the corner of the step. She looked frightful in her white and dirty rag. She was staring straight before her with a stupid look of suffering, and Sarah saw her suddenly draw the back of her roughened black hand across her eyes to rub away the tears, which seemed to have surprised her by forcing them away from under her lid. She, she was muttering to herself. Sarah opened the paper bag and took out one of the hot buns, which had already warmed her own cold hand as a little. See, she said, putting the bun in the rugged lap. This is nice and hot. Eat it, and you will not feel so hungry. The child started and stared up at her, as if such sudden, amazing good luck almost frightened her. Then she snatched up the bun and began to cram it into her mouth with great wolfish bite. Oh my, Sarah heard her say hoarsely, in wild delight. Oh my. Sarah took out 3 more buns and put them down. The sound in the hoarse, ravenous voice was awful. She is hungry. She is hungrier than I am. She is starving. But her hand trembled when she put down the fourth bun. I'm not starving, she said, and she put down the 5th. The little raving London savage was still snatching and devouring when she turned away. She was too ravenous to give any thanks, even if she had ever been taught politeness, which she had not. She was only a poor little wild animal. Ravenous, ravenous, ravenous，饥饿的，ravenous，
Ravenous.
Goodbye, said Sarah. When she reached the other side of the street, she looked back. The child had a bun in each hand and had stopped in the middle of a bed to watch her. Sarah gave her a little nod, and the child, after another stare, a curious, lingering stare, jerked her shaggy head in response, and until Sarah was out of sight, she did not take another bite or even finish the one she had begun. At that moment, the baker woman looked out of her shop window. "Well, I never!" she exclaimed. "If that young Anne hadn't given her bun to a beggar child, it wasn't because she didn't want them either. Well, well, she looked hungry enough. I've given I've give something to know what she did it for." She stood behind her window for a few moments and pondered. Then curiosity got the better of her. She went to the door and spoke to the beggar child. "Who gave you those buns?" she asked her. The child nodded her head towards Sarah's vanishing figure. "What did she say?" inquired the woman. "Asked me if I was hungry," replied the hoarse voice. "What did you say?" "Said I was just." "And then she came in and got the buns and gave them to you, did she?" The child nodded. "How many?" "5." The woman thought it over. "Left just one for herself," she said in a low voice. "And she could have eaten the whole 6. I saw it in her eyes." She looked after the little draggled, far-away figure and felt more disturbed in her unusual comfortable mood than she had felt for many a day. "I wish she hadn't gone so quick," she sighed. "I'm blessed if she shouldn't have had a dozen." Then she turned to the child. "Are you hungry yet?" she said. "I'm always hungry," was the answer, "but aren't as bad as it was." "Come in here," said the woman, and she held open the shop door. The child got up and shuffled in. To be invited into a warm place full of bread seemed an incredible thing. She did not know what was going to happen. She did not care even. "Get yourself warm," said the woman, pointing to a fire in the tiny back room. "And look here, when you are hard up for a bit of bread, you can come in here and ask for it. I'm blessed if I won't give it to you for that young man's sake. Young if I won't give it to you for that young one's sake." Sarah found some comfort in her remaining bun. At all events, it was very hot, and it was better than nothing. And she walked along. She broke off some pieces and added to make them last longer. "Suppose it was a magic bun," she said, "and a bed was as much as a whole dinner. I should be overeating myself if I went on like this." It was dark when she reached the square where the select seminary was situated. The lights in the houses were all lighted. The blinds were not yet drawn in the window of the room where she nearly almost caught a glimpse of members of the large family. Frequently at this hour she could see the gentleman she called Miss Montmorency sitting in a big chair, with a small swarm round him, talking, laughing, perching on the arm of his seat, or on his knees, or leaning against them. This evening the swarm was about him, but he was not seated. On the contrary, there was a good deal of excitement going on. It was evident that a journey was to be taken, and it was Miss Montmorency who was to take it. A, a, bro, a, bro, the bro, a brougham stood before the door, and a big portmanteau port, portmanteau portman portmanteau哦，一箱，它本身就是一个 portmanteau
portmanteau,
portmanteau 旅行皮箱。哦，no，Reverence 是饥饿的。portmanteau 旅行皮箱，旅行皮箱 had been stripped upon it. The children were dancing about, chatting and hanging on to their father. The pretty rosy mother was standing near him, talking as if she was asking final question. Sarah paused a moment to once lifted up and kissed, and the bigger ones bent over and kissed also. I wonder if she will stay away long, she thought. The portmanteau is rather big. Oh dear, how how they will miss him. I shall miss him myself, even though he doesn't know I am alive. When the door opened, she moved away, remembering the sixpence. Saw the traveller come out and stand against the background of the warmly lighted hall, the older children still hovering about him. Will Moscow be covered with snow? Said the little girl Janet. Will there be ice everywhere? Shall you drive in a drozhky? Cried another. Shall I see the Khazar? I will write and tell you all about it, she answered, laughing. And I will spend your pictures of mosaics and things. Run into the house. It is a hideous damp night. Hideous damp night. I would rather stay with you than go to Moscow. Good night, duckies. God bless you. And down the steps and jumped into the uh, broom, broom. If you find the little girl, give her our love, shouted gay Galerians, jumping up and down on the doormat. Then they went in and shut the door. Did you see? Said Janet to Nara. As they went back to the room, the little girl who is not a beggar was passing. She looked all cold and white, and I saw her turn her head over her shoulder and look at us. Mama says her clothes always look as if they had been given her by someone who was quite rich, someone who only let her have them because they were too shabby to wear. The people at the school always send her out on errands on the hor- horridest day and nights there are. Sarah crossed the square to Miss Minchin's area steps, feeling faint and shaggy. I wonder who the little girl is, she thought. The little girl he is going to look for. And she went down the area steps, lugging her basket and finding it very heavy indeed. As the father of the large family driven quickly on his way on the station to take the train which was to carry him to Moscow, where she was to make his best effort to search for the lost little crew.